Hi, this is Dr. Jarrod Spencer, sports psychologist, and welcome to the Mind of the Parent CD coaching program. This is a CD designed for you as the parent of an athlete to empower you with sports psychology nuggets of information that are going to help you help your son or daughter thrive in their sport and beyond. Let's get started now. There was a classic movie that you probably saw back in the day. It's called What About Bob? And in that movie, the psychiatrist encourages baby steps, little tiny baby steps to getting in the right direction of where you want to go. That movie is a bit comical, but it makes a really great point that you as a parent can now utilize to help your son or daughter thrive. And that is to really compliment them on the small little technical things that they did in every single performance. That if you want to discuss something with them, if you want to really help them get better, don't point out what they did wrong and how they could do it better. I mean, coaches will do that, and I'm sure the athlete's already doing a lot of that to themselves. What you can do as a parent is really point out something small and specific, like, for example, your elbow was in the right place when you were hitting that ball, or your thumb position I noticed on that football was excellent this time. Something very minute, very technical, but it's those small little technical things, those baby steps that essentially can lead an athlete to greater performance down the road. They want to get better too, and they want to know how. And I believe very strongly that the more we reinforce the small little things, one technique here, another technique at another game, another technique at another practice, and gradually over time, you are building their confidence in all the little things, and the puzzle pieces will come together, and they will thrive. Be aware of a phenomenon that's been perpetuated in sports from a very long time ago that is still very much alive in sports and can be impacting your son or daughter's emotional health. What I'm talking about is something called objects-relations psychology. Essentially, the essence of objects-relations psychology is when another human being is treated as an object, that essentially they're only of value to a coach or to fans or to parents or to a community when they're able to produce and do something, that their performance is directly tied to how well they'll be treated by the people around them. While this phenomenon in sports is gradually decreasing over the years, it's still very much alive, and particularly with some coaches that perpetuate this style. You need to be aware of this because it's not healthy for any human being to be treated like an object and to be only valued when they're able to produce. This can lead to a lot of elevated levels of anxiety, stress, depression. And so if your son or daughter is within a program where the coaching style happens to be one that's in sync with this message, then I encourage you to begin to counteract that message as best you can by encouraging your son or daughter that their self-worth is not in their ability to play basketball or how fast they can swim, but instead it's about how they treat people, it's about their character, and that they are loved unconditionally no matter what by you as the parents. Now, you might be saying to yourself, yeah, I've already said that to my son or daughter, but imagine this. Imagine if every day of practice or every day at a meet, they are actually internalizing 10 or 20 times that they're being treated like an object, that their value is wrapped up in their performance. If you're really going to counterbalance this, you're going to need to offer up more than just once a week that I love you and it doesn't matter how you actually perform, I'm going to treat you the same anyway. This is going to require a lot more than just that. And you're going to have to come at it from a lot of different angles. And it may even require encouraging your son or daughter to talk to the coach about some of this. Or maybe you talk with other parents about some of this and how, or maybe you talk about some of the other people in the support system around your son or daughter and how they can get these messages to them. Having an athlete treated like an object is just a natural part of the sport experience, although it's not necessarily a good part of it. Do your role as a parent in trying to counterbalance some of those messages. Now, I haven't said this directly to you, but I guess I should now. Be sure you're not one of those people that is perpetuating that message. I mean, think about it. If I asked your son or daughter, does your mom and dad treat you different based upon your performance, what would they say? And hopefully they would say, no, they love me no matter what, and it doesn't matter how I perform. This is important for their health and well-being for life. Choosing a college is one of the most important decisions that a young man or woman could actually ever make. I want you to help them a little bit better in their college decision-making process by being aware of a few tidbits that I've learned through walking so many athletes and their families through it already. During the summer, between their junior and senior year, I encourage athletes to put their foot on as many college campuses as possible. That they essentially should make a list up of maybe 20 schools that they're interested in and go see them. This is a great opportunity for you as a parent to road trip with your son or daughter and get a lot of quality time in the car with them. It's important that you do it in the summertime because that's when the athletes are available. Once the school year starts, they get so overextended, it's hard. Once they step on the college campus in the summertime, they may know within a few moments whether or not they want this college or not. They can rule it down and ultimately get the list down to 7 schools that they would like to attend. That's ultimately what they should apply to, is those 7 schools. Now, how do they get from 20 to 7, or how do they even begin this process? The first question that has to be asked is, what don't you want in a college or university? For example, do you want to go to a city or do you want to live in the country? Do you want to be on an airplane or do you want to be able to drive to your school? Do you want a large school that's got a big time football program or do you want a small school with more individual attention? Right there, you can begin to take a lot of colleges and eliminate them. So for example, if they don't want to get on an airplane, now you have every college in a 6-hour radius. If they don't want a big school, now you eliminate all the big schools, get the small ones. If they want D3 athletics versus D1 athletics, you see, and you begin to whittle it down more and more. If they want to be in the city, they want to be in the country. And this is how you go from a lot of schools that they might be interested in down to the 20 that they actually visit. And then once they visit those campuses, they'll know right away and they'll get it down to the 7 they apply to. I say apply to 3 schools that are, relatively safe bet to get into, good option, a little challenging, but good option. Then you want to have 2 safety schools, and then you want to have 2 reach schools. So 2 reach schools, 2 safety schools, and 3 that are kind of in the middle. And so that's an important way to whittle this down. And once you whittle them down to those 7 schools, it's important to go visit them and to allow your son or daughter to walk on that campus by themselves and search for what we call the vibe. I've had a number of college coaches tell me that they don't actually recruit so hard for the kid because in the end, what helps the athlete decide whether or not they're going to X school or Y school is nothing about the coach, nothing about the buildings. It comes down to a vibe that the athlete just felt something more on this campus as opposed to this campus. And that's what you want to really help your son or daughter experience is the vibe. And once they felt the vibe, and they're going to feel it on a couple different campuses, the real question is which campus do they feel it the most? And typically they'll know. They'll say, this is it. This is the place that I really want to be. And they felt the vibe. And it's a really good indicator that they've made a decision. Help them feel the vibe. Help them make a good decision in their college process. One side note, as a parent, you would be surprised how easily your son or daughter will be influenced by the school that you would actually like them to attend. And even though you may say, oh no, I really said they can go anywhere, you were sending messages to them that it was more of a forced choice. And in the end, the son or daughter went to that school more to appease the parent and less because they really wanted to go there. Be mindful of that last bit as well. Help your son or daughter make one of the greatest choices of their life and that they would do so knowing in their heart of hearts that they felt the vibe and they chose wisely. This is one of my favorite quotes about vision, and this is great wisdom that can help you help your kid get where they want to go and follow the path that makes them feel best overall. Listen to these words spoken by Howard Thurman. He said, quote, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and then go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive." What makes your son or daughter come alive? You love them, you see them, you have been with them. Where are those moments where you say, I really saw you come alive? Or maybe you need to ask them today, when have they felt truly alive? Because if you can cultivate more of those experiences, if you can help them along that path where they felt more alive, that's a sign that they're following their path in life, that their vision for what maybe they want to do can be clarified and crystallized a bit more. Ask yourself what makes you come alive and then go do that. Go have that conversation with them today. One of the things that I look for in working with parents and adolescent athletes, as well as one of the things that many coaches will look for when recruiting an athlete, is if the parent uses the word we when discussing their son or daughter as an athlete relative to their training or where they might go to college. An example would be if a parent said, when we get to X college, this is what we want to do. That's a red flag because the parent is not going to the college. And the parent certainly is not going to go through the training program that the athlete is. But why it's a red flag is it sometimes can show emotional enmeshment from the parent into the child's life. And so that's a problem because this may be a sign of the what we call helicopter parent, or even in sports, the Black Hawk parent. You know, the Black Hawk parent meaning that they're hovering over the kid, ready to swoop down and solve problems or intervene at any moment. And they got the guns firing and ready to attack. And so college coaches are sometimes very cautious about this type of parent that's enmeshed because it can bring a boatload of headaches and problems for them. It also can be very hard on the athlete themselves because they may feel stuck. There's nothing certainly they can do to kind of create the space between them and their parent. But ultimately, as a sports psychologist, that's where I spend a lot of my time, is just trying to create some space for the athlete from the parent, to get the parent to just kind of back off just a little bit. And so this is very important. If you are a parent and you are using the word we, catch yourself, begin to recognize that it's a symptom of emotional enmeshment. And enmeshment really talking about being too overly involved emotionally in the son or daughter's life, too tied up into this. An example that we often see with parents that are emotionally enmeshed is that they sometimes will have their emotional health and well-being ebb and flow depending upon whether or not their son or daughter wins or loses. That their mood for the day or two following a competition could actually be impacted by their son or daughter's performance. And so, sure, it's normal, natural to have a little impact, but not a lot. Not directly impacted where it lingers for quite some time. That's usually a sign that the parent is too enmeshed in this. So pay attention. If you're using the word we, you might be an overly enmeshed parent, and it may be time to create some space between you and your son or daughter emotionally so that they have the space to thrive in sports and beyond. Adolescents need 8.8 hours of sleep compared to 7.8 hours for adults. This is some research that appeared in Parade magazine on 11/28/10. And in that article, it's really illustrating the point that our young people in America have got to get more sleep. That essentially, how's your son or daughter doing in relation to what's recommended, 8.8 hours of sleep? Are they getting that? And if they're an athlete, they may actually need even a little bit more than that. Too often, sports have consumed so much time that the athlete is getting in late, getting their homework done late, and getting up extra early. And so they're getting even less sleep than maybe the adults. This is counterproductive to overall health and well-being. This is counterproductive to athletic performance. And this is counterproductive to memory recall of information they're studying and trying to learn. I urge you as a parent to help your son or daughter get the recommended amount of sleep, 8.8 hours every night, and maybe even a little bit more than that. Look, I know this may sound really morbid, but what I often say to parents of athletes that are about a sophomore, junior, senior in high school is this. If you died tomorrow, it's very likely your kid would be just fine. And what I mean by that is that by about the time they're in high school, the kid has internalized the majority or a very, very high percentage of the messages that you would very likely send to them. In particular, what I'm talking about is in sports, that after a game, what I see is that many athletes could tell me verbatim exactly what their mother or father would say to them after they competed. And that sometimes this becomes redundant, it becomes counterproductive, and it actually becomes a nuisance in the relationship between the parents and the athlete. That essentially, it would be as though if you died tomorrow and you didn't say anything, the kid would be playing in their head exactly the messages that you would have sent anyway. That they've internalized it, that it's all in there. What am I trying to say to you? That you could probably back off. That you could probably pull back on the lecture or trying to explain to them what they did well or what they did wrong. Instead, I just encourage you to talk with them less about their particular performance. maybe hear from them more, maybe listen to them more, say things to them like, help me understand this or explain this to me. Or if there's anything you'd like to talk about regarding today's competition, I would love to hear about it. Or you may even say to them, you know what, maybe we just don't want to talk about it so much. And they may say, hey, that's great, Mom, or that's great, Dad. I really don't want to talk about it. This is especially true immediately following a competition in the first couple minutes, and especially for the first couple hours, or maybe even the next day. I know it may sound morbid, but if you die tomorrow, your kid would likely be just fine because they've internalized all the messages that you've been saying to them already. It's inside their head, and they can replay it again and again and again to help them get where they want to go in sports. Today's young people have an advantage that athletes in the past did not. And the advantage that they have is that many people around them are able to screen for mental health concerns at a young age, and that they're able to receive earlier intervention than people that have gone before them. This is a real positive. And the reason is because there's something called intergenerational mental health concerns. What I mean by that is that essentially in family trees, depression, anxiety, bipolar, etc., these things have often come down genetically from one generation to the next, undiagnosed, untreated for a long time. But not for today's young people. Now we're able to screen for this. Now we're able to get this treated. There are far more psychologists out there, counselors out there, psychiatrists out there, able to kind of pick up on this stuff. And they're able to avoid some of the challenges that come with struggling with undiagnosed, untreated mental health concerns. And so I encourage you to not minimize or not dismiss if your son or daughter is coming to you and expressing thoughts or feelings regarding depression or anxiety or suicidality or anything like that, that it may be that for the first time ever, they could actually get some help and address this. One major reason why we need to identify this stuff early on and get the proper help is that too often adolescents, and this is something we've seen in past generations especially, who have had undiagnosed, untreated mental health concerns would gravitate to substance abuse as a way of self-medicating those feelings away. And so if you look back 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 generations in your family tree and you ask yourself, well, who tended to drink a lot? Who often was drunk at the parties? And what we might begin to see is that it's very possible that those individuals long developed a way to self-medicate some undiagnosed, untreated mental health concerns, because certainly back then it wasn't very likely that it would have been picked up or that there would have been many options to deal with it. But for your son or daughter today, there's help, there's hope, and it starts with you being open to getting them the appropriate help necessary to better cope, better deal with intergenerational mental health concerns. During an athlete's junior year of high school, and in particular the summer between junior and senior year of high school, this is what I see as a time for passing the baton. Just like in a relay race where there's got to be a good handoff from one runner to another runner, this is when an adolescent begins to really experience autonomy full on, and where the parent ideally would pass self-responsibility off to their son or daughter. And so summer of the junior year is a very important, critical time. Now, in this time, what we tend to see is a lot of tension between a parent and their child. That, of course, there's the growing tension through high school as the son or daughter attempts to individuate. This is what we call the process of autonomy. Autonomy means fight for independence, that essentially I will be me. And this reaches its head in that summer between junior and senior year. It's sometimes hard for a parent who has done so much and cared so much for their son or daughter to begin to back off and allow that son or daughter to fall, to make mistakes, to have consequences that could undermine so much of what they invested in their son or daughter. But this is exactly what has to happen so that the athlete can learn to take the self-responsibility, that the bird ultimately has to fly away from the nest. And to do that, it's got to learn to be able to fall and get back up again. And so I encourage you as a parent to recognize how this process is going to unfold, recognize that it's going to tend to occur in one particular battlefield more than others. And so I don't know what that battlefield's going to be where your son or daughter fights for that independence. Maybe it's over something like their room, or maybe it's over their practice schedule, or maybe it's over a relationship that they're in. And it tends to occur more so with one parent than the other. And so what I often see is it often occurs with the opposite sex parent as well. And so there's tremendous tension in there. And it can be really hard for the parent during this time. And that's often overlooked. But as the parent, it's really on you to begin to manage this, to work through this, to set the tone, to get the good handoff. If you can pass the baton well to your son or daughter, they can grab it and they can take off and they can thrive. And this is what I often work with parents on, is during this transition. It's not always easy, but if it can go well, as a parent, it's one of the best things you could possibly do for your son or daughter. And what you'll see down the road is that they have greater self-responsibility, more accountability, more intrinsic motivation. Sure, it doesn't get fully developed until they're through college, but at least the baton was passed and you feel as though they started to turn the corner. The emotional health of college freshmen has declined to the lowest level in 25 years. That's a quote from the New York Times on January 26, 2011, in an article called The Record Level of Stress Found in College Freshmen. That the emotional health and well-being of our college freshmen is a serious matter. We've got to pay attention to the mental health and well-being of our athletes in particular. They tend to endure a lot of additional stress in their lives from their sports. And so it's very important for you as a parent to not step in the trap of dismissing or overlooking or minimizing the symptoms of depression and anxiety that can creep into an athlete. You may say, because you internalized messages when you were playing sports, something along the lines of suck it up, deal with it, don't whine, don't complain, you'll get through it. You'll say something in that tonality or in that way that your son or daughter picks up like, well, I guess mom or dad doesn't really want to hear about it. And so be careful not to be sending your son or daughter off to college in one of those situations where their emotional health and well-being is at an all-time record high and it's never really been addressed. Be mindful of this. Talk to them about this and get them to the professionals if they need it, and encourage it and support it. If I asked your son or daughter, what would your relationship with your parent look like if you stopped playing your sports? What would they say? That's an important question that I want you to answer, because at any moment, an athlete's career can be over, most likely because of an injury. And if that's the case, it's important that your son or daughter could answer that question in a positive way. But the danger for you as a parent is this: little by little, subtly over time, over the course of a year, 5 years, 10 years, sports consume so much of the dynamic between you and your son or daughter. And unfortunately, that can be unhealthy, because one day it's going to come crashing down, it's going to end. And so I encourage you today to cultivate other connections between your son or daughter so that your relationship isn't based upon performance, so that your relationship is based upon just mutual like and love for each other, that there's a good communication line open there about things outside of their sport. If I ask them, what would your relationship with your parent look like if you stopped playing your sport today? I'm hoping after you make these changes that it would be a positive response. One of the most important factors in an athlete's longevity in their sport is actually support. The athletes that have people in their life that lovingly support them, that encourage them, that literally take them to practice and pick them up from practice, take them to every game and back, and actually attend the games. It's the social support that's one of the most important factors in how long an athlete actually sticks to their particular sport. In fact, at the college level, what you'll often see is that each individual there comes from a very strong support system. Ideally, not just mom and dad, although that is where it typically starts, but also even with extended family members. And so one of the best things that you can do for your son or daughter is to really support them in their particular sport. However you may want to define that support and however that may best fit with your talents and interest level, whatever you can do to support them and to encourage them with this and stick with it, this is going to be the telltale sign of how long they're actually going to pursue their particular sport. It's very normal and natural for an athlete to crash after a season. Don't be surprised if your son or daughter, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks after a season ends, is just laying around the house, not doing much. Too often parents get frustrated with them and say things like, wow, you're being lazy, you're not doing much. But that's not exactly true. It's normal and natural after a season occurs for an athlete to really crash. I mean, think about it. They just pushed really hard for 3 or 4 months, going all day, all night, really exerting themselves. It's normal and natural for them to crash for 3 or 4 weeks afterwards. A good example of this is when college students come home after their first semester of college. They'll come home after their final exams and they'll just crash, maybe for 2 weeks, just lay around not doing that much. They'll maybe even catch a cold or get sick. Again, after we exert ourselves for a long period of time, there's always this letdown. And if an athlete is going year-round in sports today, which many of them are, they don't actually have this chance to ramp down and experience a full crash, which can eventually affect them in the long run. And I've seen this impact a lot of athletes. So allow them to have that downtime, allow them to have that crash time, not just for a couple days, but probably for a couple weeks after a season. And what you'll notice then is gradually they begin to ramp it back up and they can move forward and have success in the next sport or the next season down the road. And so support the crash for an extended period of time after the season. Here's a great technique you can do with your son or daughter. Watch a great movie that's got some sports psychology messages in it with them. People often say to me, what are my top 5 movies that have sports psychology messages? Here's what they are. Number 5 is Touch the Top of the World. This is an incredible story about the first person who ever climbed to the top of Mount Everest who was blind. Number 4 is A Legend of Bagger Vance, a classic story involving Will Smith, who helps share messages that lead Matt Damon, the lead character, to get his confidence back in golf. Number 3 is Invictus, another movie starring Matt Damon. And this movie really highlights the values that Nelson Mandela utilized in sports to transform an entire nation. It's an encouraging, inspiring film and great for teams. Number 2 is Peaceful Warrior. This movie is about a young man who thought that he had it all when a tragic accident took away his athletic success, left him in a state of depression until a mentor came alongside of him and helped him rebound, recover, not just physically, but mentally, so that he was back to his sport and thriving. Facing the Giants is number 1. This is a great movie that has deep psychological and spiritual messages that reach to the heart of the viewer as we see an athlete and a team and a coach transformed from the inside out. It's a heartwarming movie that will leave you in tears and leave you knowing that there's far more to sports than just the physical. These are my top 5 sports psychology movies, and I encourage you to watch them with your son or daughter. There are 2 types of motivations necessary to excel in sports and in life. One type of motivation is called intrinsic motivation. That's when we do something because deep down inside, we just enjoy it. We get gratification out of it. We love the experience, the process of it. The other motivation is extrinsic motivation. This is doing something for the external rewards that are associated with it, such as I enjoy doing this because I get my name in the newspaper, or lots of fans come out and tell me how great I am. Those are extrinsic motivating factors. As your son or daughter progresses through sports, it requires more and more intrinsic motivation and less of the extrinsic. This is especially true as you make the jump from high school to college athletics. If you're going to be able to help your son or daughter in some way through their developmental years with sports, one of the best things you could do is to really foster their intrinsic motivation. Help them think through why they love what they're they're doing, what they really get out of it personally, deep down inside, essentially the feelings and emotions that are associated with the experience. Many of the best athletes will tell you that they just love to compete, that they love the feeling that's out there, that it doesn't matter how many points are on the board at the end, as long as they had the opportunity to just really go all out, to really battle out there, to really show the world what's inside of them. That's great intrinsic motivation, and that's the stuff that takes the athlete the furthest. That's the stuff that gets them through all the 6 a.m. practices when the rest of the world is not looking. That's the stuff that gets them through the off-season tournaments and workouts that are so grueling sometimes. The intrinsic motivation needs to be better fostered for any athlete to succeed and have greater longevity in their sport. Encourage your son or daughter by having discussions about their intrinsic motivating factors in their world. The one thing that your son or daughter wants the most from you as a parent is they want you to accept them unconditionally for who they truly are. They want you to unconditionally accept them for who they truly are. This is vital. And many athletes have a struggle because they get their performance tied up in their self-worth and their self-acceptance and their parents' approval of them. And this is a dangerous place to be in. In fact, many athletes will tell me as we work one-on-one privately that if they win, they feel so much more love and acceptance from their parents. But if they lose privately, whether the parent actually expresses the words or not, they're sending messages to the son or daughter that they're very disappointed in them, that they're upset with them, that their parents are struggling with their own emotion on how the athlete is actually doing or unfortunately not doing well. This is on the parent. And it's very important that you express to them repeatedly, especially when they lose, especially when they're in a slump, especially when they're down and out, especially when things are not going well, that you love them and you care for them unconditionally. Now, I know you may be saying, sure, I say those words, or maybe even that I know my kid knows it. But what you might also be doing is that you also might be sending counter messages every once in a while. So you could be saying all the right things about acceptance 9 out of 10 times, but if that 10th time you express to them somehow that you're really disappointed, this could crush an athlete. The reason is because disappointment is the worst thing that a kid can feel from the parent. And so that's their greatest motivator. They don't want to disappoint a parent. And so as a parent, you need to know that you could crush your kid by saying to them these words, "I'm so disappointed in you." And so there are times when they truly do disappoint you, and there are times when it is appropriate to use that. But it's certainly not appropriate to use that if you're disappointed because of an athletic performance. Athletic performance is not the most important thing in this world. And it's so important, again, that your kid knows that you love them unconditionally regardless of their performance. Why? Because the athletic performance could end tomorrow. A career-ending injury could end it forever for them. And so they need to know that you love them regardless of what their performance is. What do you talk to your kid about? It's very important for you to know that as a sports psychologist, one of the greatest phenomenons that I see between a parent and a child that's an athlete is that essentially too often, a very high percentage of the time, the parent is talking to their son or daughter about their particular sport and or the grades and not much else. In fact, I will ask an athlete, what percentage of the time does your mother or father speak with you about your grades and or about your sport? And I'll often hear them say 90% of the time, 95% of the time, 100% of the time. And that's problematic. And here's why. The kid has too much pressure on them already to perform. And as an athlete gets better and better in their particular sport, everybody in the world starts turning to talk to them about that particular activity. And so they may go through their entire day and that's all anybody wants to talk to them about. It's very important that as a parent that you give them an outlet, a release, another venue you guys can talk about. This is vital because at some point, your son or daughter's athletic career is going to end. And if all you've ever talked to them about is performance-based stuff such as their sport, when that sport's over and they don't want to talk about that sport anymore, you're going to have a very serious problem in your relationship because your communication is based upon the sport, and that's no longer what the athlete wants to talk about. What I recommend is this. Start now and find something that you have in common with your son or daughter and start fostering that. I'll give you some examples. I know of one athlete who was a college student that whenever he returned back home, his mother wanted to go to church. And so they would talk about the church life, and that was a very big part of their dynamic between them. I know of another athlete. She was really into funny movies. And so anytime a funny movie came out, she and her father would be talking about it and planning about it, that they would go and see it together. Another person was comedians. Another person was magic. Whatever it may be, there's got to be something else that you are really into. And so talk about that and make it something that's going to be lifelong, like hunting or fishing, something that you can do with your son or daughter forever, because sports is only temporary. And too often you are probably talking to your son or daughter upwards into the 90 percentile of the time. And that's a potential recipe for disaster long-term, as well as not providing your son or daughter the outlets for what they would really like to talk about in the pressure that they're internalizing now. One frustration that parents often say is that they have difficulty getting their son or daughter to open up to them and talk about what their practice was like, what school was like, or what a counseling session was like. What I encourage parents to do is to avoid asking the question, what did you guys talk about, or what happened there? Instead, ask a softer, more open-ended question like, if there's anything that you guys talked about that you'd like to share with me, I would love to hear it. Or, if there's something that you learned in school today that was pretty fascinating, I would really appreciate learning about it too. And so it's just a different way of asking questions. But what I've seen as a sports psychologist is that this tends to lead to the adolescent sharing a lot more, giving you not just the one-word answers, but giving you much more meat to this. And in particular, ask a follow-up question to the questions that you asked, not just talking back at them. It's very important to get them to share more, discuss more, tell you more about their relationships, tell you more about what's going on with their friends. And the way you could do that is by asking better questions. Belief in God can make a huge difference in an individual's overall health and well-being, and this can translate to their sport. The Washington Post on June 24th, 2008 reported that 92% of Americans believe in God, and that nearly half pray daily to God. Where do you fall according to this? Do you believe in God? Are you modeling that to your son or daughter? And if so, are you talking to God each day? Are you part of that over 50%? Praying to God daily? And so this is an important piece in emotional health and well-being, is cultivating the spiritual maturity of an individual. And that largely comes in the home, and especially, according to some studies, can come even more so from the father figure. And so if you want to empower your son or daughter with better overall health and well-being, if you want to give them more coping skills to kind of manage the pressure and tensions and stress that they're under from their sport, then you really may want to consider how well you're modeling to them your belief in God and how much you're talking with God. I encourage you to have that discussion with them today. Emotion over intelligence, E over I. You are a very smart parent with a really great heart. However, even the very best of us, at times, our emotions can override our intelligence. And we'll say things emotionally that cognitively we know isn't the best thing to say. Sports has a way of making all of us, including parents, very emotional, which is why the damage that is often done between a parent and an athlete is done when the parent is very emotional, caught up in the emotions of an athletic event. And they say something maybe that cuts a little too deep, and they wish they could take it back, but the damage is already done. Please be aware of when your emotions are overriding your intelligence. When your spouse, when your family member says to you, Mom, don't talk to him right now, or Dad, leave her alone right now. This is important. This is especially addressing that time after the athlete gets done competing. Maybe in the 5 minutes after they get get done competing, or maybe even the car ride home. But then and there is not the time when you're emotionally charged to address these things. Cooler heads will prevail, and it's important that you model this. Too often, the hurt that I hear from athletes came from the lips of their parent when their parent was too caught up in the emotion of the sport and said something they regret. They may have even apologized about it later, but the damage is already done. E over I, emotion over intelligence. Be mindful of it. Be emotionally available for your son or daughter. What do I mean by that? We're talking about your emotional energy level. As a parent, I want you to rate it on a scale of 0 to 100, 100 being the highest. If your energy level is in the 90s, that's an A, 80s is a B, 70 it's a C, 60 is D'sville, and anything less than 60 is F'sville. The quality of your ability to parent your son or daughter is going to be directly correlated with your emotional energy level. When your energy level is in the 80s or the 90s, you're going to feel great and you're going to do wonderful as a parent. But too often your energy level may begin to dip down and to the 70s and 60s, and then you're less the parent that you really want to be. When we're talking about emotional availability, that's your ability to really deal with stressors, challenges, problems, to handle emotionally what your son or daughter is going to bring to you. So as an adolescent, they're going to come to you with problems. They're often going to be emotionally charged, and they need to know that you can contain it, that they can unload, that they can dump on you. And as the mature, responsible adult and parent, that you could handle all this, not emotionally react, not get too riled up and upset, and that they can kind of emotionally, if you will, vomit, and you can clean it up, and that they can leave feeling better. And so your emotional availability is one of the best things that you can do as a parent for your kid. Here's the problem. Too often, sports occur in the evenings or the weekends, but particularly in the evenings, very likely as a parent, you work all day, serving other people, being drained of your emotional energy. So at the end of the day, you go home and you're emotionally drained and you give your worst to the people that you love the most. It doesn't really make sense, but when your kid's coming home at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night from practice and they're really tired and worn out, and so are you, that's more likely when conflicts are going to occur. And so it's very hard for parents and their kids to sometimes get along during these teenager, adolescent years. And a big way that you can change this is by managing your emotional energy, paying attention to the things that drain you and how you can better fill yourself up, paying attention to what your energy level is so that you don't step into the trap of getting caught in the emotional drama that an adolescent's going to bring to the table because you just happen to be drained. And worse yet, as a parent, sometimes you'll say the most hurtful things or be at your very worst because your emotional energy level was significantly low, maybe even in the 40s or the 30s. And because those words cut like knives to these kids, you can't get those words back. And you can emotionally scar them in such a significant way that it forever impacts your relationship. Be mindful of this. Measure your emotional energy and try to make the necessary adaptations that you can so that you don't hurt them because you're drained. Look, if you're feeling emotionally drained, say to your spouse, look, you need to step in and handle this because I'm less than my best right now and I'm probably not going to say something. And when you are at your best and you are feeling high emotional energy, it's very important for you to get in there and have those conversations. Let them know that whatever they need to unload on you, that you can handle it. This is really important for good parenting. One other side note about this is the difference between good parenting and poor parenting isn't necessarily that the good parent always says all the right things. The real difference is that when the good parent actually has their emotional energy drop and they say some hurtful things that later on, when they're feeling better, they would actually go back to their son or daughter and say, I want to apologize to you. I want to recognize that I hurt you. I want to recognize my mistake. I want to ask your forgiveness. I want to make this right. And the better parents are simply the ones that acknowledge when they were emotionally drained, less emotionally available, and they inappropriately, unfortunately, had some poor parenting. That's the difference. And so I encourage you, be more emotionally available, rate your emotional energy, and when you do mess up a little bit, Go back and own it. The ripple effect of this would be incredible for your relationship with your son or daughter. One of the most significant factor of high performers is having a spiritual presence in their life, a spiritual practice in their life, some type of faith walk. And what we see with many young people today, our 15 to 25-year-old athletes in particular, is that too often they are working very hard on developing their body. Maybe they're doing a little bit to work out their minds and develop their minds, but there's something much deeper. It's our spirit. And regrettably, many athletes are not cultivating their spiritual life. The reason why they're not doing it is because from the top-down model of their mother and father, they're not really developing it. So what I really encourage you as a parent is to rethink your spiritual journey. Now, I know for many people, they maybe have fallen away from the faith because of different reasons, but it's very important that if you want to get this information to your son or daughter, if you want them to develop their faith walk, then it's very important that you model it to them. And so you can equip them with spiritual coping skills, a faith presence, a higher power. This is vital in their life. And so taking your son or daughter to church, having the opportunity to pray together with them, having the chance for them to realize that it's not just about winning and losing in sports, that there is a God and God loves them and that there's a relationship he wants to have with them, and that developing the spiritual part of their life is very, very important. Where does this start? Since too many of our young people today are not attending church and don't have a faith component to their life compared to the people that are 65, 75, 85 years old in our society, this significant change has occurred with the Generation X, generation of the baby boomers. And so I'm really encouraging you as a parent to rethink your faith walk. And if you're doing this already, I highly applaud you, because research shows this is one of the greatest things you can give your kid, not just for life, but also in sports. It's a huge advantage. I just encourage you to really develop it, cultivate it, model it to your son or daughter, and see the positive impact that it has on their sports and off the field as well. It's often overlooked, but it's often the central struggle in many people's lives, and it's probably going on in your family with somebody. And what I'm talking about is the unspoken, unaddressed dynamics that occur between family members. This is especially true with athletes, that there are dynamics between you and them that go on that aren't really healthy. And when as human beings, we all have this, it's very important as a parent to be aware of those dynamics and try to address them. Oftentimes I'll hear athletes come to me and privately share that while they love their mother and father very much, there are certain dynamics that are going on that cause so much tension in the house, so much tension in their relationship with them, that it brings incredible frustration. These dynamics are on the adult, on the parent to address. I heard somebody once say that the difference between good parenting and bad parenting isn't necessarily that the good parents don't make bad mistakes. They do. The difference is that the parents that quote unquote have good parenting are more likely, after they make the mistake, to then approach the son or daughter and say, look, I just want to acknowledge that I said something today that was inappropriate or was harsh and I hurt you in some way, and I apologize. I ask your forgiveness, and I want you to know that I'm going to try harder tomorrow to be a better father or a better mother. Something like that is essentially the hallmark of better parenting. And so it's amazing how if you address those things and those dynamics that can go on there, you can really move forward and grow a healthy relationship with the adolescent. And then consequently, they're going to perform better in sports. But if you don't, this often becomes the undoing of many family dynamics. So while the outside world thinks that, wow, things are so great in that family, he or she's excelling in sports and the family's all together, privately, there are often a lot of stressors, and sports can really stress dynamics in families, particularly if you have more than one child and maybe one child is getting all the attention because of the sport and the other children are not. These dynamics exist, and we've got to address them, and we've got to talk about them. And as a parent, that's really on you. Inadvertently, you may be setting your son or daughter up for great disappointment and a great failure in life. Here's why. Too often, parents can get easily swept away in their son or daughter's athletic career and get behind them in achieving the ultimate goal that they're working towards. The problem is very few athletes actually achieve that ultimate goal. And even if you do achieve it, inadvertently you still might be setting them up for the fall. Here's what I mean. A very wise man named Ravi Zacharias once said that the saddest day in a person's life is that after they achieve the ultimate, which they thought would bring them total happiness, but they wake up and they still feel the same. And maybe even worse, they maybe still feel empty inside. You see, sports a lot of times can be used to fill this void within us. And many times you'll hear athletes say that, yeah, after I won the Olympic gold medal or after I had that Super Bowl title, it still didn't fill that emptiness inside, and it wasn't exactly what they thought it would always be. As a parent, don't set your son or daughter up for that failure where they assume that they'll be happy once they're a state champion or once they are the starter on the team. It doesn't work that way. I mean, take it from a guy like Troy Aikman, who said on the field after winning a Super Bowl, is this it? Is this all there is? And that's the highest pinnacle in sports that we have today. So help your son or daughter realize that it's not all about winning that championship, and that winning the championship isn't going to fill the void. It's about something much deeper. In fact, where I'm going with a lot of this is that it's more of a spiritual matter, more of a deep faith-based concept that we often try to fill this void within us with a lot of different things. Maybe it's food or drugs or sex or money or fame. Could be a lot of different things. And for adolescents, sometimes it could actually be sports. And so when they achieve that, or if they don't achieve the ultimate goal, and when their sports are over, what's going to fill the void then? And so help them early on in their developmental years to fill the void with something deeper, something more of a faith-based spiritual component that would actually stick and help them for the long haul. There's a phenomenon that often occurs when an athlete is in the summer before leaving for college. And that phenomenon is that the tension between the athlete and both parents, or at least one of the parents, reaches a high point where there's so much tension between the two or the three that the athlete is saying repeatedly and even outwardly, I just can't wait to get out of here. I just can't wait to get off to college. And admittedly, many parents will say, I just can't wait for my son or daughter to leave as well. That the tension between them is so great that they're banging heads so much that they just want to part ways. Why is that when deep down inside, the individuals love each other so much and they're really quite sad to go that they would actually get to that place where they'd say, I can't wait to see him go. And the reason is this. Oftentimes, an athlete who's going away to college will become irritable, cranky, miserable, push the limits, begin to reject the authority of the parents because it's easier to leave another human being when we're angry at him. It's easier to leave another human being when we're upset, when we're angry at them, and it's easier to walk away. People often don't break up when things are going really well. They break up when there's incredible tension and they just want to get relief from that. So unconsciously, the adolescent will create the tension and feel the anger, and it motivates them to actually leave. It helps the transition. What we tend to see is that by Christmas time, at the end of the first semester, the adolescent will come back home, and it's this huge transformation. They're literally a different person emotionally because that tension that was there just a few months earlier seems to have gone away as the bird has flown from the nest, has made the transition successfully to college, and is no longer going through that hard process of leaving. They re-engage the mother, the father, they re-engage the family, and they can actually come and go much easier. That emotionally it's not so hard for them to leave going back for second semester as it was going for the first semester. And so understanding this as a parent is critical because you can avoid stepping in the trap that is often set of this growing tension that's being brought to the table by the adolescent. And so it also can help you modulate your own feelings in this situation so that you can understand for you as a parent as well, yes, this is going to hurt. Yes, this is going to be sad. Yes, this is going to be complex. But if you can privately grieve, working on your own, then you're not going to step in the trap of getting caught up in the drama that might be laid forth by the adolescent. I know this is hard, but ultimately you want to help your son or daughter go full circle. Fly away, leave the nest, have a good transition to college, come back home after the first semester, and from there on in, you'll notice that it's a lot better, a lot easier for them to come and go. As a parent, what are your hobbies? What do you like to do for fun? What do you like to do for enjoyment? This is important because you want to model to your son or daughter the importance of having a hobby, something that you just do to derive pleasure, that it's not based upon any particular outcome or performance, that you just enjoy doing it because you enjoy doing it. An example would be fishing. That somebody just loves to fish and they love to be out there fishing, or maybe they recreationally like to ski, or maybe it's sewing, or maybe it's cooking. Whatever it may be, this is important that you model this to your son or daughter. They're growing up in a world where the pressures on them are so great to perform and do things that are going to lead them into a future that's highly productive. And so one of the shortcomings of this is that what I'm not seeing in today's young people is that they have some outlet, some way to let out the tension that they're carrying inside. Hobbies do that. And so it's very important for you to encourage them with a hobby. Now, some parents may say, well, that's just a waste of time. You're just collecting coins, or you're just pursuing card tricks because that's something that seems silly or fun. But really, encouraging them with some hobby is going to really help them break some tension. In fact, some of the best athletes that I've ever worked with or known of can tell you that, yeah, they love their particular sport and they invest a lot of time in it, but they also have hobbies, something that they enjoy, especially when you're traveling on the road from hotel to hotel and so much time on the bus. There's a lot of time to develop a hobby and to do it for fun. And it can be a great tool to bring people together and to rally around this. I can think of one particular athlete in his sport where magic tricks, card tricks became his thing. And not only would it unify his whole team, but when he would go and compete in other tournaments and against other teams in competition, those other athletes would want to come around him and see his card tricks. And it became something that was so fun that it was actually written about in newspapers and magazines and online journals and things like that, because it was such a wonderful hobby that really helped gel athletes together. And it was just done for pure fun, pure enjoyment. What's your hobby? How can you model to your son or daughter the importance of having a hobby? And how can you encourage your son or daughter with a hobby as well? Information overload is a problem that today's young people are experiencing. We're living in the information age, and how this is hurting athletes is primarily because they can get so many videos, so many facts, so many statistics on each of their upcoming opponents. And while there is a certain degree of this that's very healthy and very helpful in sports, where it's not helpful and not healthy is when a parent is bringing so much of this to their son or daughter. Particularly if your son or daughter is a high school athlete and entering their junior and senior year, if they want the information on their opponent, they should be getting it themselves. But I don't think it's healthy for parents to be saying to their son or daughter, well, I studied this film on your opponent, here's what you need to know. Or I went on this forum and there's some people saying X, Y, and Z about you. Or let me tell you about who you're competing with today. They beat so-and-so, so-and-so beat them. All of this stuff is just information that generally causes more anxiety. And it's the performance anxiety that undermines so many athletes' competition. And so this film study or this information is appropriate if it's done in the presence of a coach or if the kid is initiating it themselves to a moderate degree. Again, you've got to watch your son or daughter as well, that they're not spending too much time on forums and online trying to research all this stuff. It can be information overload on their end. But tragically, what I often hear as a sports psychologist is that the parent is way more into this stuff than the kid. That a dad would literally be at work on the computer researching everything they can about the son or daughter's next competition and about their opponent. This is inappropriate, and this is part of the information overload. Look, if you're doing this as a parent, I know you might believe that your heart is in the right place, but I want to share with you that even though your heart is in the right place, this information getting into your son or daughter's head can actually be counterproductive. Be very careful not to contribute to the information overload. You might think you're helping your athlete, but what I see again and again is you're actually hurting them. Unfortunately, your son or daughter doesn't have a strong enough voice yet, particularly if they're in high school, to say to you, I don't want this. Please stop giving me this, because they don't want to hurt your feelings. But if you can be aware of this and pull back on your own, you may actually find that you do an incredible service to your son or daughter and to your relationship as well. Here's one of the greatest techniques you can ever use as a parent. The technique is to ask a follow-up question to your question. Here's what I mean. Too often I hear parents say, sure, I talk to my kid about X, Y, and Z, but when I listen to the kid talk, what I hear them say is that the parent talks at them or to them, that it's more of a one-sided conversation, and that the son or daughter, unfortunately, feels like whatever they're feeling kind of gets stifled. One way you can avoid this is by listening more. I mean, truly listening more. How do you listen more, even though you think that you already are doing a good job at it? It's important to ask questions to your son or daughter, and then ask a follow-up question to that question. And in particular, try to ask the open-ended questions that are going to force them to elaborate, force them to not give one-word answers. And so if you're getting one-word answers, it's probably because you're asking questions that lead to that. An example of a good question would be, tell me a little bit about what practice was like today. Or explain that to me further. I want to hear more about what went on in that situation. Or you might say something like, I'm really curious about this because I don't really understand this. Can you explain this to me? And so the more you can ask questions like that, and especially the follow-up questions to whatever they say, the more they're going to talk. If you can engage your son or daughter in more conversation and get them going, and you've probably have experienced this before, but once they open up and they start talking, it's like the floodgates come down and they've got so much to say. And that is very healing for an adolescent. One reason why this is so healing is because what they will unload to you about and talk about is all the things that are in their preconscious mind. You've heard me say that clearer mind, better performance is the mantra that leads to success. And so they want to have a clear preconscious mind. And one of the best ways to do that is to talk about it. And so it's on the parent to get the kid to talk. And how do we do that as parents is we actually have to ask better questions, ask follow-up questions to our questions, ask open-ended questions that really get them able to talk. And then we got to do this without passing judgment, without offering solutions to the problems, without trying to jump in and be critical. We've got to try to suspend as best we can our opinions for the moment so that we can allow them to unload. After a while, and sometimes as a sports psychologist, an athlete may just talk and talk and talk for 20 minutes. After a while, eventually I'll find that there's an opening for me to make 2 or 3 suggestions that could really help them improve in what they did. And so I often won't jump on the first or the second story that they're telling, because really there's deeper matters that they're wanting to get to. And even though there's a lot of work we could have done on the first or second topic, I'll be patient, because the more they talk, the more they're getting to deeper matters, the more they're getting to the heart of the matter. And therein lies great opportunities for powerful suggestions. As a parent, it's on you to ask the questions, to allow them to open up and really talk. It's on you to really listen. I mean, truly listen empathically and to validate, to get them to that place. If you can do this, you'll be amazed at how your son or daughter is willing to share more with you and how you're able to share more with them and be more the parent, get them more of the wisdom that you really want to impart to them. Oftentimes, the unlived dreams of the parent negatively can influence a son or daughter's performance in that particular sport. Unfortunately, since we all know this already, the opposite of it is also true at times, that the lived dreams of the parent can also negatively impact a person's performance. Allow me to explain. That essentially, if a parent had a lot of success in a particular sport, let's say football, that they might be more inclined to say, I don't want my son or daughter to play football. Why? Because they already lived out all their dreams in there, but they may say, I really want my son or daughter to play lacrosse because I never had the chance to play lacrosse and I would like to do that. You see, it's an unlived dream of the parent that they didn't play lacrosse, but it's also a lived dream of the parent that they played football and excelled at it, so thus they wouldn't want their kid to kind of go down that path. Their own emotional needs, what they needed from football, they've already gotten. But the kid may really want to play football. And so therein lies some tension that we've got to be careful as parents to be mindful of our lived dreams as well. That we are more commonly aware of how the unlived dreams negatively impact a child's performance in a particular sport, but pay attention as well to the lived dreams. It's very likely that your son or daughter can't hear you from the stands. When an athlete is competing, they're so engrossed in the moment, they're so focused on what they're doing, that it's very difficult to hear anything from the stands. And this is especially true if there's a large crowd. If there's actually a large crowd, let's say like a high school football game, and there's several hundred people there, it's very unlikely your son or daughter can pick your voice out of the crowd. And even if they do, they're probably trying to block it out and focus more on what they're trying to do in the moment at the task at hand. Maybe the one voice that gets through would be the coach, but why am I saying this to you? Do not be that loud parent in the stands. It's embarrassing for your kid. It's embarrassing for the people around you. It may be embarrassing for your spouse. You think you are strongly helping out your son or daughter, but the reality is you're not helping them nearly as much as you're likely embarrassing them. I can't tell you how many athletes I've worked with who said to me privately, I am so embarrassed when my dad or my mom acts like that in the stands and says those things in the stands. Don't be that parent. And a major reason why I want you to not be it is because it's ineffective anyway. The kid can't hear you. And so why are you saying those things? I know you're trying to encourage them. I know you feel extra connected to them. I know that it's a release of the tension inside of you, but you've got to find healthier outlets. You think you're helping them, but really you're very likely hurting them. Don't be that loud parent in the stands. Sports become year-round, and it's very important, particularly for our high school athletes, to be sure that they are getting some downtime from their sport each year. Because the sports world will essentially take as much as a young man or woman is willing to give, it falls on the parent then to set some firmer boundaries to help ensure that the kid gets some downtime. How do we do that? This falls on the shoulders of the parent, and what I ask you is very simply this. How do you model downtime? How do you model to them relaxation, setting boundaries, stepping away from your work, your challenges, burdens, and experiences? Because they will internalize those messages and apply the same. Now, I know in some environments, it's go, go, go all the time. That's the culture, that's the mentality. But what we see a lot of times is that's not always healthiest. That working smarter is oftentimes better than just working harder. And so getting the downtime for your son or daughter is vital. And the key component in that is how well you model to them being able to relax. For example, when you go to the beach, can you truly unwind? Can you lie there and read a book? Or if you're home on a day off, can you just hang out? Or are you busy doing projects? I mean, how do you spend your downtime? Because that is how they are going to learn to spend their downtime as well. And if they're going to excel in the long haul in sports, they're going to need to have some downtime each year in their sport. Here's some valuable information about communication. 70% of your communication with your son or daughter is expressed in your nonverbals. That's your body language, a look, just a movement of your hand. But 70% of how you're communicating is nonverbal. 25% of how you're communicating with them is your tone of voice. Only 5% of how you communicate to your son or daughter is actually your words. So while your words really matter, it's more important that you pay attention to your nonverbals, because your kids are internalizing the messages that you're sending. And most of the time, you're not even aware of that look on your face that they're picking up on, but it says everything. And one of the places where this is so important is after your child loses in sports. When they experience a loss, you may say the right things, but clearly they are picking up all the vibes that you're not okay with it, that you're really frustrated perhaps with this, and that it's coming across in your nonverbals. One of the best ways that you sometimes are made aware of this is when your spouse privately tries to express to you that what you conveyed to them wasn't really all that great. You might dismiss it or minimize it because you're simply not aware of it. And you may even have a strong rebuttal in saying that, yeah, but I said X, Y, and Z. And yes, you said the right things, but how you said it, that tone of voice spoke so much louder than those words you express that the kid unfortunately picked up on it. 70% of your communication is nonverbal, 25% is your tone of voice, and 5% is your words. I urge you to be more mindful of your nonverbals, to really hear your tone of voice, and to pay attention to how you're communicating with them, because your relationship with them is contingent upon how they are internalizing the messages that you're sending. Too often, many parents aren't even aware of the hurtful or the negative or the opposite messages that they're actually sending to their kids. Pay attention to this. Parenting comes down to two factors: demandingness/control and warmth/empathy. And where you are at on the continuum with these two characteristics are very important in your parenting style. Psychologists would say that there are four parenting styles. The authoritarian, this is an individual who is very high in demandingness and control, but their warmth and empathy, they're pretty low. This is a dynamic where we'll see a lot of kids really thrive in that environment for a certain amount of time, but ultimately the kid usually ends up cracking under the pressure. That without the warmth and the empathy, it was just too much. This is the kid that we say, whatever happened to so-and-so? They maybe did really well in high school, they went off to college, and it kind of all fell apart. The next parenting style is the authoritative. This is the parenting style that's high in demandingness/control, but also high in warmth and empathy. An example of this parenting style would be if a parent says, you will be home at 12 o'clock, and if the adolescent comes home at 12:10, there's a consequence associated with that. There's some punishment associated with that. But at the same time, there'll be a hug and a kiss and I love you and a real warmth there. And so the parenting style that's high in demandingness, very controlling, but very warm, very loving, this is the recipe for success. This is the parenting style that tends to go a long way. The next parenting style is the passive parenting style. This is the parenting style that's very low in demandingness/control, but they're very high in warmth and empathy. This is the parenting style that tends to be of the home where the high school kids will often go and party because that parent is so cool. They don't demand a lot or ask a lot, but they're really loving and cool. And that's also not a healthy dynamic to be in. The last parenting style is what we call laissez-faire. This is essentially where the parenting style has low demandingness / control and also low warmth. Unfortunately, this is the dynamic that often produces a juvenile delinquent, somebody who's just kind of wandering the streets because nobody really cares about where they're at within their family dynamic. And that's unfortunate. As a mother and a father in a home, you need to understand that what we often see is maybe one parent might be a little high in the demandingness and a little lower in the warmth, and the other parent adopts the opposite role, so that they'll be a little higher in the warmth and a little lower in the demandingness. Does that sound like you? Because if it does, you've got to work together as a pair to say, okay, if you are a little too demanding, you need to back it off a little bit and increase the warmth, and I need to consequently decrease my warmth, become a little bit more demanding, and we'll have more of an equilibrium. If both parents can come to the table with the authoritative style, not one parent being the authoritarian and one parent being the passive, that's not going to be the best dynamic. But if you can both come to the table as the authoritative, you will find that your parenting style is far more likely to produce a well-adjusted child, and that his mental health and well-being is going to translate into greater performance in the classroom, on the field, and beyond. It's called the shadow side of your personality. That part of you that you don't want to often admit, but it's a place where all the not so good aspects of yourself lie. We all have this shadow side of our personality, and with your spouse and your family members, they're often the ones that actually get to see it. That you'll present a certain way all day long, but when you go home, there's this other side of you, the shadow side, that likely will come out. That shadow side is very important for you as a parent to be aware of, because the stuff that's in it can be impacting your son or daughter's performance in sports in so many ways. And so when you have an argument or some tension with your son or daughter over something, look at it as a learning experience for yourself. Look at it as though they are shining a big old spotlight into your shadow and illuminating something about yourself that's probably a not so favorable aspect of yourself, but you have long wanted to look away, not really address it, but they're calling you out on it. You can learn a lot from your son or daughter because they're going to help you develop better awareness of what's in the shadow. And if you can be more conscious of this, if you can work it through, if you can resolve it as opposed to be defensive about it, what you're going to do is tear down a barrier between you and your son or daughter. You're going to improve that relationship. You're going to alleviate tension in their mind. You're going to alleviate tension in your relationship, and they're going to be more psychologically freed up to thrive. How you deal with the stuff in your shadow relative to how it impacts your son or daughter's performance is a critical aspect that you can be aware of, you can work on in helping your son or daughter thrive. Thanks for listening to this Mind of the Parent CD coaching program. It's my sincere hope that something I shared with you helped inspire you to become more the parent you want to be. And in turn, that helps inspire your son or daughter to thrive in their sport or beyond. Thanks so much for listening.